All right, welcome. Let's see. Maybe need to bring this screen down a little bit. Oh, it'll be fine. This has been a long time coming. I've installed a new operating system on my computer. I've reinstalled Screencast-O-Matic. I am a technological mess, but I think this is going to work now. So in class, well, now yesterday, we did Great Britain. We said Great Britain was the most liberal of our five big countries, although sometimes they struggled because of the lack of women's right to vote, the push of the socialists, the Labour Party, and David Lloyd George, and then the Irish, who eventually, just prior to World War I, will get home rule. So as we move on to France, we know France is a mess, like I'm a technological mess. France, we've gotten to the Third Republic, where we've picked up France. The Franco-Prussian War, Bismarck kicked Napoleon III's butt, and off he went. So Bismarck then, as they reestablished a new government in France, a third republic, he required a proper liberal government with universal male suffrage, which is fairly ironic considering he did not have the best, most open liberal government, but he required one in France. So the elections, when they had elections, however, resulted in a victory for the monarchists over the Republicans. So in France, they have a one-house legislature at this point, which is like 600 and some seats, and the monarchists got 400 of the 630 seats. So in response, remember, monarchists are people who want a king. Okay, monarchists in must be a little early for me. Sorry, the early late. I have a problem with my words all the time. The Yep, now I can't even remember what I was going to say. Oh yeah, let's hit the slide. The monarchists, so they want a king, and they're your members of the National Assembly, because the National Assembly is France's parliament. Okay, then a group called the Paris Commune is going to be created, because these are the people who don't like the fact that there's a whole bunch of monarchists. So remember when the National Assembly was created, they just kind of formed themselves. And during the first French Revolution, they didn't have any real power there at the tennis court oath. Well, the Paris Commune does the same thing here to the National Assembly in 1870. So the Republicans have formed this Paris Commune, but the National Assembly refuses to recognize them, give up any of their power, anything. So fighting ensues, which in France, what else could possibly happen? So bitter fighting between the National Assembly or the monarchists and your Paris Commune, which are mainly made up of working class men and women. And the National Assembly will crush the Commune. There's about 20,000 people who are shot just in like a couple of weeks of fighting. 10,000 sent to New Caledonia in the South Pacific, because that's where they send their prisoners in France. I mean, it's a mess, and the Paris Commune did not fight well. You know, they formed this revolutionary government or government body, but no guns, no preparation. They just don't think ahead they just don't think ahead in France. Anyway, so the National Assembly crushes the Commune, but they have problems of their own because they can't agree on a king. So what they win is the right to appoint a king as monarchists, but they don't have one. The last of the Bourbon kings, which is the Louis, is a guy named Chambord, but he is just kind of a putz. And in this day and age, you can't be a putz and be king. You know, you could be foreign and be king in earlier centuries, but not anymore. He refuses to accept the French flag, the tree color flag, the one that has the red, white, and blue. He wants to fly the Bourbon flag. Well, in 1870, you don't get to fly your family flag as the national flag of France. So they really can't put this guy. Well, that was an interesting graphic. They really can't put this guy. Oh, that was the National Assembly crushing the Paris Commune. Oh, I am creative. Anyway, so they can't decide on a government's the point. You can't put this Bourbon guy in charge. So they have to compromise. So really in the end, the Paris Commune gets part of their way because the monarchists are fighting for a right that they're not even going to take advantage of, which is just funny. So 1875, the Paris Commune, or your Republicans, and your monarchists agree on a government. And this is supposed to be a temporary government. The Constitution of 1875 was intended to be temporary, just until they could figure it out, till they could find a new king. In the end, it is the longest standing French constitution. So 65 years it's going to last until they basically lose their country to the Germans in World War II. So bicameral legislature is what they established. Up until this point, they've only had that one house legislature. So they establish a two-house legislature, which is a Senate, and they're indirectly appointed. And then you have the Chamber of Deputies, which is the lower house, and they're elected in universal male suffrage. They also create the office of the president, which is a 7-year term. And then they have ministers. They have prime ministers. However, unlike Germany, the prime ministers in France are responsible to the Chamber of Deputies, the elected body, not the president. In Germany, the ministers are only going to be responsible to the king, which gives that body of the king, prime minister, significantly more power because they're not responsible to any elected body. Okay, they'll also legalize trade unions, require education, and they're going to replace the Catholic Church as really the leaders of education, or they were the ones that were running the education and giving the education, the Catholic clergy. They're going to replace them with Republican-minded teachers and centralize their curriculum around French history, geography, and literature. And then 1879, they're going to introduce this minister system, as I said. So they're going to have a prime minister, minister of defense, all sorts of ministers, but again, responsible to the Chamber of Deputies. So there's a little check on their power, little checks and balances there. Radical Republicans will eventually regain control of the legislature, but not until after the Dreyfus Affair. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So, France, they are required to have elections after they lose to Prussia, or now Germany. Monarchists are elected. The Republicans don't like that, so they fight. And in the end, the monarchists win, but they can't agree on a government and are forced to compromise. And the compromise is the Constitution of 1875, and now they have a sort of representative government. That's France. They have some problems. Challenges to French stability and French liberalism. First thing is anti-Semitism. France is having some problems here, crisis-wise, most exemplified by the Dreyfus Affair. So the Dreyfus Affair is about a guy named Alfred Dreyfus. He was a Jewish military officer found guilty of selling army secrets. He was found guilty in a secret military court and sent to prison. All right. He didn't do it, so there were people who found evidence that exonerated him, pointed to a new suspect, but the army, which is the conservatives, the monarchists, refused to call for a new trial. So the Republicans, it was really a rallying point for the Republicans. They kind of freaked out's the wrong word, but they went crazy. They knew who did it. It was this Catholic aristocrat who actually sold the army secrets. It was not the Jewish military officer Dreyfus, but the conservative army refused to call a new trial. So the radical Republicans get the public involved. They push for a new trial, and finally in 1899, 4 years, he spends 4 years in prison. They grant them a new trial, or they grant Alfred Dreyfus a new trial, and he is exonerated. However, they refuse to arrest the Catholic aristocrat, which the evidence points to was guilty of selling military secrets. So the effect of this Dreyfus Affair is a rallying point for the radical Republicans. They will gain control of the legislature in 1900 after Alfred Dreyfus is exonerated. At that point then, they purge the army of all high-ranking officers and appoint their own Republican-minded officers. So 1905, church and state are officially separated in France. The Catholic Church really from the church government. It had been done a while ago. Really, we'd had a pretty good separation of church and state, but in France they hung on, like the Catholic clergy being the teachers in all the French schools. The government or the church still had a significant amount of land in France, and they're going to take that back. And I'm noticing I've gone on for 9.5 minutes. This is why this lecture must be so boring. Okay, I got to hurry up. Here, the challenges to liberalism, really the economic downturn. Your workers are really unhappy, but they're unable to organize and push for reforms like in Great Britain. So there's going to be no social welfare legislation. You're socialists. Well, there are just as many workers as there are in France, in in Great Britain, in France, they're not able to organize and push for social welfare legislation. So the German workers will get some pensions, health care, the British workers will, but not the French workers. And then the last thing is the Boulanger crisis and the corruption in the National Assembly. So the Boulanger crisis is this military officer, General George Boulanger, and he was retiring from the army. In order to be an elected official in France, you couldn't be a military officer. So he had to retire. So they were waiting for this guy. This is the conservatives. They're waiting for this guy to retire. And once he did retire, because people liked him, he wanted revenge against Germany for the Franco-Prussian War. He was a strong military leader. They expected him to stage a coup. So 1888, 1889, he was supposed to be the guy that made that constitution temporary. Like they're waiting around for him to retire so that he can take over the French government. 1889, he's supposed to do it. All of his supporters are expecting him to kind of go to Paris and overthrow the government. He loses his nerve. He goes to Belgium and he commits suicide. So again, another rallying point. So there's some challenges for liberalism. There's some challenges to French stability, but in the end, the liberals and the radical Republicans will really come out and will come into World War I here at the turn of the century really in control of France. The conservative old order is really lost in France, and we have a legitimate liberal government. All right, so that's France. I'm not sure that I can do Germany in 3 minutes. Oh, cute picture for the day. All right, so let's do the review questions quick, and then I'll have to start a new one for Germany. And I just decided that I'm not sure that I know how to post to YouTube at home. This is just a mess. Anyway, here's your review questions. Why don't you pause it, see if you can answer them, and then I'll go through them quick with you. Pause now. All right, so the Prime Minister answers in Great Britain responsible for extending suffrage. That would be Gladstone, also the Redistribution Act in 1884. What were the challenges to British liberalism in the late 19th century? Your Socialist Party, David Lloyd George, Organization of the Workers and the Labour Party, your suffragettes, your women in England becoming increasingly more radical, and then your Irish wanting independence and home rule. The Paris Commune is your radical Republicans who decided to call themselves a governing body of France in the 1870s, and then they lost battle to the National Assembly. Why was the Constitution a compromise? Because the conservatives, the National Assembly, couldn't agree on a king to put forth, and so they created a bicameral legislature. And the Dreyfus Affair was the best example of anti-Semitism when the Jewish military officer in France was convicted of selling secrets, even though he didn't do it, and when they found out the other guy who did, the conservatives refused to call a new trial until the radical Republicans kind of pitched a fit, went public with it, and then it was a rallying point for them. Okay, I'm going to stop now, and I'm going to try and load another one with Germany on it. Thanks.